Yep, I can hear you. Mhm.
Yep, now she's on.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Virginia City Council Chambers. We have a special council meeting to come before we start the committee of the whole meeting, and we have one item on the agenda, so I'll call the special council meeting to order. Today's date is Tuesday, December 15th, 2020. The time is 9:04 a.m., and because this is a special council meeting, I'll ask Pam to take a roll call, please.
Mirabeau,
Present.
Reed Leib.
Absent.
Thank you. Paulson,
Present.
Beyondich,
Present.
Johnson,
Here.
Baranzelli, Huffy.
Present.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Pam. One item on the agenda today, just a note, Pam, that Councilor Friedlieb is also present.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The first item on the agenda is the only item on the special meeting, and that is the resolution for the IRRR funding for the Cane Lakes. This is an emergency request for some funding for Cane Lakes. They ran across some issues with respect to the downtown revitalization construction project. And Britt, would you have any specific information you could share with the public?
Yes, when Cane Lakes was working on their tuck pointing of the building at 416 Chestnut Street, the bricks fell off the second story. So they had an emergency expenditure request to IRRB, who said that they would assist with some emergency funding. However, IRRB cannot give grants directly to businesses. It has to go through a city or a nonprofit. So they're asking us to participate by just being the fiscal agent and pass through for the money.
So this emergency meeting is to take action on acting as a fiscal agent for funding for the Cane Lakes project through the IRRB.
Correct.
Thank you. Councilor Johnson?
I will move that we act as fiscal agent and complete necessary paperwork.
Councilor Johnson moves to approve this request.
All support, Mayor.
Support by Councilor Bearable. So it's moved and supported to adopt a resolution to act as a fiscal agent for emergency IRRB funding for the Cane Lakes project. Is there any further discussion?
Yes, Mayor.
Yes, Councilor Paulson.
Thank you so much. In the resolution, it states the IRR. Is it back to IRR or is it IRRR?
It's
Yeah.
Department of Iron Range Resources.
Yeah, that was my error. I keep referring to it as the IRRB, but actually it's the IRR, the Iron Range Resources.
Okay, so the resolution's correct.
Yes, I always refer to it for whatever reason as the IRRB, but the resolution is correct, yes.
I do the same thing. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you. So it's moved and supported. Is there any further discussion? Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to commend Cane Lakes and the investment they're making in downtown, purchasing a second building, their cooperation with siding the west side of the building in cooperation with the pass-through park. They really are being a great community member. And if you're looking for chocolate, you better order ahead because their shelves are empty and they've got probably a dozen people working in there every day, hence the need for the expansion. So they're one of the things we can be proud of in the city of Virginia right now with the downtown revitalization.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Johnson. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all
I'm
those...
sorry.
Councilor Beyondich, go ahead.
Yes, I'm sorry. Steve, could you repeat that? I couldn't understand what you were saying. Thank you.
Sorry, I had my mask on. I was just talking about how great they're doing with revitalizing downtown Virginia and the amount of investment they're putting in the cooperation with the city. So I just wanted to give them a shout out for being great community members.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye, opposed, motion carries. Thank you. No other items on the agenda for the special city council meeting, so we stand adjourned on the council meeting. Thank you, everybody. And we'll move right into the committee of the whole meeting. We'll call this committee of the whole meeting to order. Today's date is Tuesday, December 15th, 2020. The meeting notice does say 2011, or December 11th, but it's December 15th, 2020. This is a regularly scheduled committee of the whole meeting. And I'll call this meeting to order at 9:12 a.m. And we'll turn this part of our committee of the whole meeting over to our city administrator, Britt C. Bennis. Britt?
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is a collaboration agreement with LifeLink 3 between the Virginia Fire Department and LifeLink. We do have
Chief?
Chief Alan Lewis here to discuss.
Morning, Chief Lewis. So you brought the battalion chief, Joel Martinson, with you as well?
I did. I always have good help.
There
That'll
you
be in
go.
our next presentation. Thank you, and good morning, council. Just very briefly, this collaboration agreement allows us to collect funds that we would not otherwise receive when we do an intercept with the Air Medical Service LifeLink 3. We already have this agreement with North Memorial Air. What this allows us to do, and I'll give you the scenario. So say we're called to a medical up in Orr, and we drive for an hour and some minutes out in the middle of the woods somewhere to a logging accident, provide care for a patient that has, been seriously injured, even transport that patient to a landing zone and are met by a helicopter. Currently, there's no way for us to collect funding on that call. There's no money because we did not transport to a hospital as is required by regulations in order to bill. So we would literally be all of that time and all of those resources out for collecting. This agreement allows us to bill $457 to LifeLink for those services provided, the IVs, the bandages, the medications that we might use, the time that our crew has spent. And so it's a cost recovery mechanism. Like I said, we have this in place with North Memorial already, and it's just an agreement that allows us to bill, but that does need to come through the city council. So it's just one of our ways that we're looking to, maximize potential sources of revenue as budgets are tight and we look at all options. So any questions?
Any questions from the council? Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. In the very first paragraph, the collaboration entered between the City of Virginia Fire and Ambulance. Can the fire and ambulance do that, or does it need to be with the City of Virginia specifically?
It does need to state City of Virginia doing business as Virginia Fire and Ambulance.
So if we could make that a
We can make that change.
adjustment, please.
And I would like to, since Steve brought it up, also point out that when we make the motion, the official resolution for the council meeting, we will state that we will authorize the mayor and myself to sign as per the charter, the contract.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Any further discussions before we'll need a motion for that? So any further comments before we enter, ask for a motion? Okay, looking for council action for Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. So how does the back end of this work? How do we get the money? Is there an invoice process, or what does that look like?
Our billing company, Transmedic Billing, reviews our charts, and in the narrative section, when Air Medical is mentioned, they will look up, identify the Air Medical provider, and then bill the appropriate Air Medical provider for that. We don't have to do anything here at the city. That's our billing companies.
Thank you very much. I would move that we approve for the council meeting with the aforementioned corrections.
Moved by Councilor Johnson. Is there support?
I'll support.
Support by Councilor Beyondich. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is the request for a statement of qualification solicitation for the architectural engineering design services for the Public Safety Center project. I am working with Sherry and Chief Lewis, Sherry, our finance director, and Chief Lewis, our fire department chief, on working on submitting our preliminary application to USDA for the gap funding we need for the Fire Public Safety Center. And the first step we have to do for the gap funding is tell USDA who our architect is. So we need to start looking for an architect for that project.
So this is the first step moving forward to get a statement of qualification.
Statement of qualifications. So
Very
what,
good.
what that will do is allow firms throughout the state or wherever they're from to submit to us their reasons and their abilities, what they've done in the past for such a similar facility.
Very good, thank you. Any council questions or comments? If not, we look for council action. Councilor Bearable?
Britt, I just have one question for you and the chief. I know they're looking at legislation this coming session, that any bonding stuff that's been approved by the state, that they may not have to have the cities and stuff have a match, if I'm reading that correctly, as long as we have funding that can go for the project. Would this be an eligible part of the funding for that, if it passes?
This is not actually, would not be entering into a contract with the architect. This would just be reviewing contract
Okay,
architectural. When we get to that point, a little closer to that point next year where we're ready to start spending money, then we'll have to do the resolution to
'cause
pay
I don't
ourselves
want
back.
us to, I don't want us to forget about lobbying for that.
Correct.
Yeah, that is a part of our request for 2021. Thank you. Okay, looking for council action.
Also move that we go out for, basically you want an RFP for an architect, correct? I also move that we go out for an RFP for an architect for this public safety program.
Okay. Moved by Councilor Bearable and supported by Councilor Barnzelli. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is approve resolution accepting the bid from Northeast Technical Services for pre-demolition inspection at 231 Second Street North. And we do have Bill Hennis, our Public Works Director, here to speak on this.
Bill? Good morning, our Public Works Director, Bill Hennis. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning. This is just for the house that we received from HRA last year to move ahead with the demolition process. This would be for the hazardous waste inspection fee.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Johnson?
Is this the one across the street from that?
Third Avenue Motel.
Yes, okay, thank you. I would move that, and before you that, and this is just for the inspection. This is
Yes.
going to tell us what we need to take out
Yeah,
later.
then we'll move ahead with hiring a asbestos abatement contractor after that.
Okay, I will move that, that we authorize the asbestos inspection.
Thank you. Is there support? Support by Councilor Barnzelli, so it's moved and supported to approve the resolution accepting the bid from Northeast Technical Services for the pre-demolition inspection at 231 Second Street North. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda is to approve the quote for the cardboard recycling truck chassis from Rim Kenworth and the truck body from McQueen Equipment. And again, Bill Hennis from the Public Works Department.
Bill, is this a budgeted item for 2021? Sherry's nodding her head, yes, it is. Bill?
Yep, this is just a replacement of our 2014 cardboard truck. If you notice, it's a little different than the quote that we received for our last regular automated garbage truck, as this is the next size smaller truck, and also this has to be a right-hand drive. Being that the type of body that we use, we got to keep with that right-hand drive, and subsequently, you see there's about a $20,000 conversion fee, but still, this one costs about the same as the other one.
Thank you, Bill. So, Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. I'm just curious, as we're moving forward, have we looked at what it would be for an electric truck? Just because it's just doing the recycling and that kind of stuff, have we done any of that research or?
No.
Okay, and not for this, but I think it would be just to get an idea as we're moving forward at some point, that may be in our best interest to be looking at that. So if, just keep that in mind as we're doing little things, vehicles that don't have to haul tons and tons. Cardboard doesn't have a tendency to be too heavy unless it's wet. So just a thought. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Johnson. Looking for council action on item 4 on the finance.
Also move item 4 on the finance, the purchase of what is it, basically the chassis bill?
This is both the cabin chassis and the body.
Okay.
It's the second part.
I'll move for both of those.
I'll support.
Moved by Councilor Baraboo, supported by Councilor Freely, to approve the quote for cardboard recycle truck chassis from RIHM Kenworth and the truck body from McQueen Equipment, which is budgeted for 2021. Is there any further discussion?
Carl had said something.
Carl, did you have any further discussion? Okay, no further, okay, thank you. No further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Bill.
Next item on the agenda is Buildings and Grounds, discuss interior color selection for the MEC, and we have both Brian Silber, our Park and Recreation Director, and Eric Wedge from DSGW, our project architect here.
Brian, good morning. Eric, good morning.
Good morning, Council. Before you today, you will see a whole lot of samples and examples of what our design team and our staff have been looking through for the interior selections and finishes for the project. Want to let everybody know that our design team has reviewed all of these, and this is the design team's recommendation at this point. Some of the paint colors will be picked at a later time. In addition, there were a couple of items, 1 or 2 items that both the staff and the design team were not thrilled with our selections, so we are evaluating other selections. But we are wanting to move forward all of these selections at this time so that we can get them all ordered and we do not incur any construction delays. And at this time, I'll turn over the remainder of the presentation to Eric Wedge from DSGW.
Thank you, Brian. Eric, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you, Council. Thank you, Brian. As Brian stated, the design team met. We met at the existing Miners North Room last Wednesday. It was about a 2-hour presentation, hour and a half. I don't know if you guys want me to go through that level of detail today. All the selections that were made by the design team and the multiple choices that they had were in your Committee of the Whole Council packet. So before you, I have the complete presentation that was given to the design team. On the council table in front of you are the actual hard samples of the materials that were reviewed and approved. The sample to my left, to the mayor's right, the furthest board is the convention center palette of materials. Keep in mind that when we were selecting the exterior materials and some of the interior materials, we were honoring our tradition of mining and logging. So you will see taconite in your fireplace. You will see some tile in the lobby that represents taconite. As we've seen the pictures before of the convention center, we also do have wood, and we're paying homage to the logging industry of this area. The middle board takes on more of that lobby space colors and the palette and the tile. And then the furthest board to my right takes on the color palette of the arena. Again, with the track being red, some accent colors being red. We were not specific in color. It was pretty strong request of the design team that the arena be neutral and not take on school colors of Virginia and/or Rock Ridge. But if you hold that thought for a minute, we understand that the colors that we have selected, should the high school team want to paint their locker room in that color, when they take lease or ownership of it, that these colors will coincide with Rock Ridge colors. So with that, I'm trying to keep this short and simple, and if there are questions for me, then please feel free to ask me at this time. The reason why we're before you today is, as you've watched the progress of the arena, it will be enclosed sometime after the first of the year here. The precast is supposed to be complete by the end of this week. Then they will be putting the long span joists over the main arena. And most of the long span joists are already installed in the balance of it, and they're roofing and decking as we speak. In fact, they have heat in the convention center, heat in the locker room areas, and we will expect our first pour potentially of concrete before Christmas. So these selections at this time are appropriate for delivery times to get them to the site. All the materials that are presented here in the packet that you received and that are presented were all part of the guaranteed maximum price, or GMAX price, that was provided by Kraus Anderson. So there were no color selections that are going above and beyond our budget. So with that, I'll open it up for any type of questions, comments, concerns for discussion.
Okay, thank you. First, I'll just make a quick comment. Thank you, Brian, our Park and Rec Director. Yesterday, I had some business over at the Miners and was able to preview all the suggestions that the design team went through. I gave my opinion on a few things, but I support the design team moving forward. That's why we have that in place to make those decisions of what they think is appropriate within the budget. So thank you for that, Brian, for giving me a preliminary view of that, and Eric for making your presentation short and to the point. So thank you. We'll go to the council for any additional comments. Councilor Bearable.
Yeah, Eric, I just want to compliment the design team and yourself. Looking at these schemes, they very well are conducive to the exterior structure with the coordination of colors and stuff inside and outside. And I really like that. And I like what you're doing with the timber industry and also the mining industry. So that's our two major industries up here. I think you've done an excellent job, and so has the design team. I have no problem with those three boards that are up front.
Thank you kindly.
Yes, thank you. And thank you, Councilor Bearable. Councilor Freely.
I would echo the same sentiments that Charlie just did too. This is a nice job. And looking at the table, I mean, it's reminiscent of the landscape of looking out over like Rushlu Pit. You see all those colors out there. And so it's very similar to what you see in the area. And as far as popping colors in the arena, that's going to happen around the boards with advertising and so on. You're going to have that. That's going to be, you know, adding to the whole motif or whatever you call it. So nice work. Thank you.
I'll just add to that, if I may, that the design team wants to pay homage to the historic teams of the past. So each locker room, potentially, there's 13 different locker rooms, we would have an accent color that might represent the Golden Bears, might represent the Gilbert Buccaneers, not fully painting that locker room, but just to pay even further tribute to the teams of the past that have played on the Iron Range.
Okay, thank you, Brian. Councilor Paulson, any questions or comments as a member of the design team?
Thank you, Mayor. No, it was just a pleasure to work with both Brian and Eric, and just what they brought forward in terms of samples for all of us to look at and to compare colors and just to stay within our budget. It was really appreciated. So thank you both for that very much.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Paulson. Councilor Beyondich.
Thank you. I would echo Councilor Paulson's thoughts on that. It was very nice to work with a professional such as Eric to guide us through this and have the input and some of the discussions we had and how to, we all came to a consensus on it. And it's been a very enjoyable process. So I thank Eric and everybody on the team for helping us. And I think it's going to be wonderful when we're finished. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Beyondich. I know that you mentioned taconite, you mentioned logging. Of course, iron ore is always part of that as well, correct? We have some iron ore things in there too. Thank you. Any other councilor have any questions or comments? Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to point out too that there's some blues in there which really represent what our basis of tourism and what people come here for is the water. So you all did a phenomenal job and I appreciate your work on this.
Yeah, thank you, Councilor Johnson. Brian?
Just in full disclosure to the council and to the public, the one item that we have not selected that we will need to select is the stone that is on the hearth of the fireplace. What was in our base bid, none of the staff and none of our design team liked the color selection that was in there. So currently DSGW is getting other samples and everything for different stone that can go on that mantle and the hearth there. This could result in a small change order in the future, but after discussions with staff and discussions with our design team, we feel that is more than warranted, especially with the small amount that change order would be to provide the excellent statement that we want this fireplace and our whole facility to be making. I just wanted to make the whole council aware that that is the one item that is not here and will be coming in the future.
Well, just a quick question for you, Brian. What is that in the arena area there or in the convention center, that stone? What is that for? In the lower left-hand corner on the board here. On the table, that.
Yeah. This is the taconite stone that will be going on the fireplace.
Right,
And this is the stone that also will be on the columns of the exterior of the convention center as an accent piece. What the stone that Brian is talking about, I didn't bring a sample of it, is that we have a hearthstone that is this little linear band.
Yes, he did.
And it was, our options were a sandstone that were really, really white, and we need something that more complements the taconite sample. So it may, that sandstone did have a cost to it, but we're trying to find a more complementary stone that goes with this. So as Brian said, more to come.
Yeah, and you did explain that to me yesterday, and apparently I didn't remember, so thanks, Brian. Okay, so we're good. Who?
Councilor Beyondich?
Councilor Beyondich, question?
Not so much a question, but thank you for bringing that up, Brian. I know they kind of cringe when I come in there and it's like, okay, we got to stick with our budget. But when we did look at the stone for that hearth area, it was similar to the window of, the framing around our windows and doors. The base price material was not cohesive with the rest of the room and the feel of it. So that, yes, we were warned that could be a little bit of an upgrade, but I think we were all in consensus on having that stand out and be a very nice piece for that area. So I just wanted to thank him for bringing that up. And yes, there may be a change order on that piece. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Beyondich. So we don't need a motion here, just to discuss the things, or do you need a motion to approve these? I wouldn't think we did, do we?
We would like a motion that you accept the design team's recommendation and the presentation so that we can authorize Kraus Anderson to order the balance of the materials.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Before we do that, go to Councilor Bearable.
Just one question from you, gentlemen. I'm assuming that large fireplace has a totally insulated box, so there won't be any big transfer of heat to the stone, because if you get certain amounts of transfer of heat to certain stones, they'll crack. Am I correct on that?
You are correct. It is a gas fireplace, so it will be insulated box. It's a heat and glow product
Well, those are good
used
products.
typically everywhere, so it will not transfer heat to the stones to cause them to crack.
Perfect.
As I have in my fireplace at home, same system. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Councilor Bearable. So looking for some council action on item number 5 under Building and Grounds and moving forward. Councilor Bearable.
I will move that we accept the recommendation of the design team and our professionals that have looked at this for allowing Kraus Anderson to go out for, would it be bids?
You've already accepted bids on this price. We get what's called a shop drawing reviewal of the materials. All these were the materials that were submitted by your low bidders.
So we just
And
need four
we
of the
just need,
materials.
we want authorization to release those shop drawings.
Okay, that's what I'll move then.
A move by Councilor Bearable and supported by Councilor Freely to approve the recommendations of the color selection for the interior design for the MEC. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you kindly.
Thank you. The next item, number 6 under Buildings and Grounds, is review the change order for the MEC.
Brian?
So we are here again to present another change order for the MEC. This one is a pleasant change order and I guess an early Christmas present for the council. This change order is a reduction of $3,578.63. What we have done in this change order is we have modified the landscaping around the building by eliminating the boulevard trees and minimizing the trees in the parking lot. Then we have added an irrigation system to maintain the trees and the landscaping around the building. This resulting in a $3,000 savings to our project. So we're asking your approval to change the landscape and get money back.
Okay, quickly. Okay, thank you, Brian. Looking for action from the council. A move by Councilor Freely to approve the change order for the MEC to the positive in the amount of?
$3,578.63.
Is there support? Support by Councilor Barnzelli. Is there any further discussion? I like the addition of the irrigation system. That's primo. No further discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Brian. Once again, thank you, Eric.
Next item on the agenda is under Personnel, and it's discuss fire hall staffing, which is referred from the Personnel Committee last week, and we do have a presentation from Battalion Chief Joel Martinson and Fire Chief Alan Lewis.
And as the chief comes forward, along with Battalion Chief Joel Martinson, we did have a Personnel Committee meeting, which we met and discussed some proposals from the Fire Chief and Joel Martinson, the Battalion Chief and the staff, regarding the request for taking a look at our staffing at the fire department. We heard earlier discussions before the meeting about the cost associated with the loss of revenue and our taxing our ability to do transfers based upon this pandemic. And so the chief and the battalion chief have come up with a plan for us to take a look at. The personnel committee did look at that, felt it was prudent for this to move forward to the rest of the city council for discussion and action. So Chief, welcome, good morning, and thank you.
Good morning, Council. Thank you very much. As the presentation gets pulled up here, this has been an issue that we've struggled with for a number of years. We addressed it as early as 2017 when the council recognized the need for additional staffing and staffed with an additional 6 single-role EMTs. Since that program's been initiated, we've had 12 members that have joined as single-role EMTs that have moved into full-time dual-role paramedic firefighter positions in our department to be replaced then by more single-role EMTs. It's been a very, very successful program in terms of building capacity for our organization and allowing us to handle more transfers. Our revenue has reached levels that it hasn't been in the past, but the demand continues to outpace our resources. So if I could go to the next slide, please. I'm going to start with a very, very high-level overview of what we do briefly before we get into the proposal or the ask, which Battalion Chief Martinson will detail. The calls for service, and I took a one-year look back. We're not at the end of the year yet, so I did a December 1st to December 1st, 2019 to 2020 overview. All of those blue dots that you see up there, and hopefully Councillor Paulson and Councillor Bjondich, when you're following along with your presentations that were emailed to you, and hopefully you can see these things. Can we check and make sure they're seeing what I'm seeing?
Sure. Councillor Paulson first. Are you able to follow along with this presentation?
It was an email I sent this morning, right before the meeting, that should have gotten to the council members. I just sent it again to Maya and to Julianne.
Okay.
It's not going to be in your packet. Is there a hand-printed one that was just handed out?
Right, we have a handout. Councillor Paulson, have you received the email with respect to the presentation given today?
I just received it.
Okay, thank you. If you want to open that up, we'll give you a couple minutes to take a look. Councillor Bjondich?
Sorry, I think I'm good on that. I did receive it, yes.
Okay, thank you. We'll give you a minute or so to open it up, and we're just starting the presentation. Now let us know when you're ready.
Again, I thought it would be helpful, before launching into this presentation to make sure everybody was following along, because there is a lot of data and there is a lot of graphs and charts, and there is a context of an explanation that goes with it. So as they're opening it up, this right here shows the calls that we have been on in the past 1 year period. The blue are medical calls, the red are fire calls. You can kind of see stand out there. But really what I wanted to show is just the scope and the breadth of the area that we cover. While we may have a primary service area of 640 square miles, we intercept with over 1,000 square miles. So we are going all over the entire northern part of St. Louis County. And you can just see where those dots are illustrated on the map. Just making sure both councilors have that presentation open, and we can go to the next slide, which shows a little bit more of the same.
Councillor Paulson, are you able to follow?
Yes, and I love the pictures, Chief.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Bjondich, you as well?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chief?
Yeah, you're not supposed to skip ahead to the end, but all right. You have illustrated before you is slide number 3. This is the Virginia Fire Department calls for service by jurisdiction and by frequency. Again, I'm using the same time frame, the December 1 to December 1, 2019 to 2020. What you see on the left-hand side of the screen there is a heat map, that red and orange. That just shows the frequency of those responses that we looked at before. You can see, where you have a larger heat map signature, just where those concentrations of calls are a bit. And then you'll see on the right-hand side of the screen all of those jurisdictions, and there's 33 different jurisdictions that are broken out by color. So that shows the amount of the jurisdictions that we go to. And, it's kind of a bunch of colors all running together, but again, I start from a high-level overview, and we're going to proceed now into more granular levels. So if we could go to the next slide. Okay, so this looks at all of the jurisdictions in northern St. Louis County, and this looks at the number of calls that occur in those jurisdictions. And you have Virginia Fire Department and Hibbing Fire Department, the top 2 call getters. Now, these are the calls that occur in the 17 square miles that is known as the Virginia Fire Department area. There's 3,547. That includes all fires, all medical calls, and all transports that originate within that 17 square miles. So this is a geographical representation by jurisdiction. And I just want to make sure everybody's clear on this because, the total number of calls that we run is a lot higher than 3,547, but those are the calls that originate in our area. And you can see, us and Hibbing are very, very busy departments, and then you can see the rest that, not quite as populated areas, and they really trail off in terms of, number of calls. So this is just a high-level overview of what everyone else is doing comparatively in the county, northern part of the county. Next, please. All right, and then this is just broken up in a pie chart. So you can see 27% of all calls run in North St. Louis County for fire and EMS is run by Virginia Fire, and the 25% there is followed by Hibbing Fire. And then you'll have the rest of those jurisdictions. If you start at the top, Virginia, Hibbing, Chisholm, Aurora, and then run across, moving left to right, they run in a decreasing manner in a clockwise motion up around. So 6% would be Chisholm, 5% would be Aurora, 5% would be Eveleth. So that just gives you another way to look at that data. So, yep, any questions? So
Would you please clarify, these are all calls, including EMS and fire?
all calls in that jurisdiction. This is a geographical
in the
representation
17-mile jurisdiction. Thank you.
in a one-year period. All right,
Thank
next
you.
slide, please. All right, now we're going to talk a little bit about our calls, Virginia Fire Department's calls. 88% of our calls are medical. 3,949 calls in that, again, same time frame, December 1 to December 1, 2020. 88% are medical. Those include all the EMS calls, the transfers. They are medical in nature. Fire calls constitute 334. Fire calls are fire alarm calls, structure fire calls, car fire calls, anything that involves an actual fire. And then the other there would be your hazmat type of calls, your odor in the area, your, some kind of assistance, cat in a tree, swan stuck to a lake, those kind. All true, all have happened. And so this just gives you a representation. This just shows the number of calls that we are tied up on. And we're going to get into it a little bit deeper. We'll go to the next slide. And we're actually going to talk about time commitment on each of these calls. So it's not just the number of calls. And again, these are the ambulance responses by jurisdiction. So again, all jurisdictional responses, Hibbing, we're still talking about Virginia Fire Department's ambulance responses. So these are ambulance responses. These are medical calls. 65% of the time we get a 911 call, we are going to Virginia. That also means that 35% of the time when we get a 911 call, we are not going to Virginia. We are going outside of our area 35% of the time for an ambulance 911 call. 10% of those times are to Mountain Iron, 5% are to Gilbert, 4% are to Pike Sandy Britt, and then 3% are to Eveleth. And you say, well, why are we going to Eveleth? Well, those are the intercept calls. Those are the cardiac calls that need to go straight to Duluth. We just did one literally earlier this week where it's a load intercept. Yeah, this is a systemic myocardial infarction. We are going directly to Duluth because that is the hospital that's best equipped to deal with that. And so we bypass Essentia, Virginia, because they are not equipped to handle that level of cardiac. This puts a significant amount of work on our system. If you see that 65% of the time we are responding to our area, but 35% outside on our ambulances. So just remember that number, and 35% of the time we go on an emergency 911 call in our ambulance. We're not even in Virginia. Yes?
Could we just pause there for one moment, Chief? Thank you. Councilor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, what is the average time frame for a call that goes to Duluth and comes back? What does that look like for an average run?
That will run around 3 hours.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
And that's for prep time and offload time, and now with COVID testing, sometimes they're delayed at the hospital, so.
Restocking, all that?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, we'll look at fire responses. So 81% of the time there is a fire response by the Virginia Fire Department. We are responding to Virginia. 8% we go to Hibbing. Now, to clarify, there on our automatic box alarm, we're on theirs, meaning they get what they believe is a working structure fire. We're on our way there. One of the reasons for that, you say, well, that's a long ways away. Well, the immediacy of the response puts us at Hibbing ahead of many of the other agencies that do not have full-time staffing. And the same with Hibbing. There's been a number of times when Hibbing's ladder has showed up on our fire and it's been perfect timing. We're like, okay, yep, we need that ladder right there. We need to protect that exposure. So while it is a drive, that resource is very, very valuable. Do I wish they were a little closer? Yeah, but they're not. So it works out. So when you see that 8% of our fire responses to Hibbing, just realize that we also reciprocally get that in return. Is there any questions on the fire calls by jurisdiction where we go? Okay, and those other two, both Eveleth and then Mountain Iron, that are listed down on those a little bit lower. We have mutual aid agreements with those two, or automatic aid agreements, meaning they have a fire, we go, we have a fire, they come. So, all right, next slide, please. All right, and these are the other responses, where I talked about those were the very, very small percentage of other calls that we go on, is less than 5%. So 73% of the time those are in Virginia. Again, it's similar in nature to the fire type of responses. So next slide. Okay, so this is Virginia Fire Department time commitment by unit. So we can look at each single unit that we have in our fire department, and this is per St. Louis County Dispatch. I will say that there is actually more time committed here than is actually shown, because they frequently miss assigning units to fires, or they assign a generic unit to a fire. This is the best we can do with the CAD system that we currently have and with the record keeping. But if you'll notice at the grand total hours at the bottom, now these are unit assignments. There's a minimum of 2 people assigned to most of these units, other than, where you have VC1, which is my rig, or VB1, which is Battalion 1. That could possibly be 1 person in those, but all of those ambulances, all of those engines and rescues that are indicated by those row labels there, that stands for a unit in our fire department and a CAD assignment. If you'll notice, there's only 8,760 hours in a year, but our units were assigned 7,059.55 hours of that. So we had a unit assigned about 80% of the entire time last year, if you were to put that. Now, realize there was overlap. Sometimes there's 5 units on a fire, but I think that's important to note that, in terms of hour and unit utilization, we had a very, very committed force. There's a huge time commitment there. So just the numbers, when you look at it and you see, well, there's 4,500 calls, that's a number, but when you start looking at the hours and then look at that in terms of a full year, there's a lot of resource commitment. And we'll get into a little bit more of just how much of a day is consumed by that, or how much of our time is spent, especially in terms of transports. Next slide, please. So again, we're still talking about time. So our time allocation for emergency calls, again, the same time period, December 1st through 2019 to 2020. This is how much time we are spending on those calls. Remember that earlier slide where I said 65% of the time we go to Virginia for an emergency medical call. We're only spending 61% of our time in Virginia, meaning we're spending 39% of our time outside of Virginia on a 911 call that is for an emergency. If we have a 911 call for an emergency, both fire and EMS, 39% of the time it is outside of our jurisdiction, outside of the 17 square miles it is the city of Virginia. So that gives you a little bit better idea of where our time is being spent. Next slide, please. And please, if there's any questions at any of these, I can elaborate further. The purpose of this is to educate and inform, not to befuddle and confuse. So I realize there's a lot of graphics, and you might see I have a propensity for pie charts. I really like to show portions of a whole and where time is committed and where resources are. So these are all of our calls by category. This is, again, broken down by CAD system. When it says other EMS, this is by St. Louis County. This is really everything that they can't put into a cardiac, a respiratory, a trauma. It really kind of gets thrown into a mix here. And it's kind of sad, because if we did have medical priority dispatching, you'd be able to see a much more definitive breakdown of where our calls were located. And we can usually pull that with our image trend system, which is our medical side of things from the medical side. But hopefully we can work towards getting a more advanced CAD system here in the future that really gives us more granular detail. Next slide, please.
Chief, before you go.
Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. When it says psych, is that the transfers out of town, or is that a psych in town? How does the CAD define a psych call?
That is a good question, because that actually is defined as an emergency type of call, or an emergent call we're responding to. If it was a interfacility transport, it would be labeled as interfacility transport, and no further data would be listed on that call. It would just be a transport. They don't record those interfacilities. I have to go to our data internally and pull that to find the number of those transfers to, Thief River Falls and things like that. So this is 911 St. Louis County CAD data. It's very, very broad and very undefined. I'll just leave it at that.
Would you say mental health calls are more than that little bit defined on here that that folks are dealing with on a regular basis?
Yes, Councilor Johnson, in some of the data that I ran, 15% of our calls are either mental health or alcohol-related, alcohol, opioid, or mental health calls. That's 15% of our total call volume. And I presented that to Essentia Health at one of the board meetings that or not the board meetings, the mental health task force group that we'd had.
Thank you for that.
All right, yes.
Oh, go ahead. Please continue.
VFD call time utilization. So here's a split on the hours that are committed to transfers versus emergency calls. As you can see, we spend over half of our time on transfers. And that's why the comment about if it's not a trip to Duluth unless I see an ambulance there is a frequent one by many of the people. You drive Highway 53, you're going to see an ambulance or two. It's just, and you look at the amount of miles that we put on those ambulances, and I will say it's very good that we have ambulances that can sustain 300,000 miles. Otherwise, had we had the ambulances of a few years past, the wheels would be falling off of them right now, or the engines would be gone, or the transmissions would be gone. These ambulances can sustain 300,000 miles, and we're getting every bit of those miles out of them. So lots of miles, but lots of time. That's a lot of road time. So these transfers are quite an impact or service. And when you think of that, I mean, I don't know of another service that spends more time on transfers, emergency and non-emergency transfers, than they do actually going to 911 calls. It's astronomical. I have not heard of that. Councilor Baraboo?
Yeah, when my wife and I go to Duluth, there's not a time, and you're absolutely correct. We either see one or two ambulances on the road, one going back sometimes and one coming down. It's doubling up a lot of times, or even more. We've seen two ambulances at times. And I can't remember a time I have not seen a Virginia ambulance in the last year when I've gone to Duluth with my wife that's not been on the road to Duluth.
I'm sure the crews will attest to that as well.
Chief, please continue.
All right, next slide, please. I promise we are getting to the ask here eventually. I think it is important to understand the overview of this. So time allocation in hours by hospital. So 90% of our time when we do a transfer, it's coming out of Essentia, Virginia. That's 2,979 hours that we're spending because of Essentia, Virginia needing a transfer to another hospital. So put that into context. There's 8,000 hours in a year, and we're spending almost 3,000 of them taking transfers. We do go to Cook. They need ALS transfers quite a bit, and their ambulance service isn't able to provide ALS transfers, so there's 189 hours there. So this is, again, allocation by hours by hospital in the last year. All right, next slide, please. And now I even get into a one-week look back. So I got the most recent week I could pull data for, and this was a 100-call week. We went on 100 calls that week. And these are the transfers by agency in northern St. Louis County, looking from December 3rd at 7 o'clock in the morning, which is when the shift started, to December 10th at 0700, which is when that shift ended. So this is a 7-day, 7 24-hour periods. We took 25 transfers in that week. Hibbing took 14, Hoyt Lakes took 6, and so on and so forth. That was the total number of transfers that happened in northern St. Louis County in that 1 week period, and we took 25 of them. Any questions? And I'll go to the next slide. And then this is just broken down into percentage-wise. So we took 41% of all of the transfers last week that is up there on the board. All right, and 1 week transfers by hospital. Again, 28 of those transfers came out of Virginia. 46% of all transfers in northern St. Louis County in that 1 week came out of Essentia, Virginia. The other 4 hospitals made up the remaining. So you'll see a 46%, versus a 54% for the other 4 hospitals. So that just gives you an idea of the workload that is being originated at Essentia, Virginia. Next slide, please. All right, here's where we get into staffing and calls. So I've talked about where the calls are. We've talked about how frequently they occur. We've talked about, what jurisdictions they occur in. We've talked about the time that is committed to each of these calls. And now I'm going to show you the resources that we have to do all of this work with. This is each shift for that last 1 week period that I talked about, where it was a 100-call week. There were 6 dual rolls on the 3rd, and there was a single roll. They ran 14 calls that day, and 4 of those were transports. Remember, these transports take about 3 hours. So there's 12 hours right there when you run those transports. So that's 12 hours. That's literally half of the day where you've got an ambulance on the road that is not in service to run local 911 calls. It's not, those personnel aren't available to respond to a fire. They're basically out of the picture. Even with that, there was 2 turndowns. Because you will have local calls stack, you will have fires, you will have other things that come up where you just can't do a psych transfer to Thief River Falls or things like that, and so those have to be turned down. There just isn't enough people when you have 7 total in the station and you have 2 of them gone for half of the day, and these calls begin to stack up. And you'll see each shift there labeled by the staffing, and it was 6 or 7 that were on that day. And you wonder, whoa, why so few when you have 9-person staffing? Well, I have, a number out on FMLA. I have 1 recovering from an illness. I have multiple that are out on short-term disability. Some, recovering from surgery. And so this COVID is not really the cause of this. It's exacerbated it a little bit, but it's not the primary influencer of the staffing here. It's just when you have more people, you have more injuries, you have more illnesses, and you're not able to staff to that level that you would like necessarily. The number of staff here, and you'll see the number of calls. I mean, you look at the December 6th, there were 6 people on in a single roll, and they had 19 calls that day. They did 6 transports. That's 18 hours of that 24-hour period that we had a rig on the road. So with 7 staff total, and you've dropped now to 5, if you have a structure fire, 5 people showing up would be good if you could get all 5, but there may have been a local EMS call. All of those other 19 calls are still happening during that time. And it is not, nothing occurs in a vacuum, right? They start compounding. So 100 total calls, 25 transports, and even with all of that, there were still 9 turndowns that week that we just couldn't handle due to lack of staffing. Go to the next slide, unless there's any questions. So I'm going to let Chief Martinson talk at this time. Battalion Chief Martinson has put together this plan, and the proposed staffing solution that we seek is to hire additional single-role paramedics because of they are the most cost-effective option given what the demand is. Remember, 88% of our calls are medical, and I'll talk a little bit about, or I'll let Chief Martinson talk a little bit about how he developed this and where he'd like to go, and he'll walk through the slides.
Thank you very much,
Could
Chief.
I ask a question quick?
Yes, one moment, Chief. Councilor Paulson?
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Mayor. Thank you. Do you have a percentage per month or a number per month of the number of times that Essentia has been on divert? And then how does that ripple effect impact, where we're transferring these people? And is there a different level of reimbursement when the hospital goes on divert?
Okay, a lot of questions there. Councilor Paulson, the first question, do I have the accurate data when Essentia, Virginia goes on divert? Short answer is no. They have been very reticent to share that information for obvious business purpose reasons. There are different types of diverts, and there is not clear language that defines when notification needs to occur. And so, for example, a CT scanner can be down, and they'll go on CT divert. Sometimes they will go on a complete divert where they say, don't bring us any patients. Well, they legally can't do that. If we have a cardiac arrest patient, We're bringing them to Essentia, Virginia. We're not going to transport them all the way to Duluth doing CPR and that. We do go to the closest facility. So there's different types of divert. They have not shared that information. And then your question is to reimbursement. No, there is no what you call a modifier factor as far as billing that we can apply when they are on divert and we have to go somewhere else. And thank you for bringing that up, because that starts what's called a snowball effect. They go on divert, and instead of a 45-minute medical in Virginia, we're now going to Hibbing, and that turns into about an hour and 45-minute medical, which then puts that ambulance not in service to take a transfer from Essentia, Virginia, which may have been the reason they went on divert in the first place, that their beds were full. And so you literally have a backup in the system that just gets absolutely horrific. It's like an accident on the freeway when things are backed up. It doesn't take long to back things up, but it sure takes a long time to get things flowing again. And when you go divert further out, and you're going to Aurora or you're going to Hibbing, and you're adding additional time onto you, that is not helping the situation. And their beds are still full, or they don't have the appropriate staffing to allow an admit to the hospital, so they want to send that patient out. This is almost a daily occurrence, I would say at times. And we've been tracking this very, very closely in the past couple of weeks, and very detailed level from our battalion chiefs on exactly what transfers they were able to take, and when they couldn't take one, exactly why they were not able to. So I hope that answered your questions,
Right.
Councilor Paulson?
Yep. It answers most of my questions, but that tells me that there's maybe a doorway open for a conversation to take place in terms of the reimbursement portion of that, how that ripple effect impacts the fire department or the ambulance service. I don't know if that's a discussion that we could enter into, but I think that's a valid discussion, because it really does impact the rate of service in terms of how long your guys are out.
It does, and I actually pointed that out in a very succinct email to CEO Sam Stone, and that was shared with the entire city council, I believe, about the impact that diverts are having on that system. As far as recouping money for that, or I don't know how, well, I do know how that conversation will likely go. I would say that's definitely a conversation we can have, but I guess I'm not real hopeful.
Councilor Paulson?
That's all I had for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think to your point, Councilor Paulson, when we take a look at our strategies moving forward and how we look for reimbursement opportunities, I think this is a conversation that goes at the higher level than Essentia Health. I think it goes at the level of reimbursement through our state, through a taxing district, and those other kinds of things. And I believe that the staff is looking at, with the leadership of our emergency management coordinator, the chief, and his staff, with the battalion chief Martinson and others, with the city ministry, move forward and looking at a way in which to put together some type of a presentation that we can make at the legislative level for some additional funding for reimbursement. This also goes to your concept about a conversation along with St. Louis County about what they do for reimbursement for the ambulance service, and that begs a conversation as well. So a strategy moving forward for them, that next legislative session would be important. How we go about that will determine about the pandemic and whether or not the legislative capital is going to be open or not. But looking forward to that respect, I think the chief has already laid the groundwork and done some preliminary work about making a presentation in some capacity to address those questions that you have, Councilor Paulson.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Johnson, and then we'll go to Councilor Bearable. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, when and how are the individuals' calls notified that the hospital is on some level of divert? Is that something we know ahead of time, or could you describe how you all find that out?
Frequently, we get a phone call directly to the station just saying we're on divert. Sometimes, though, it's a surprise, and you're transporting a patient and try to give your hospital report, and they say, yeah, we're closed, we're on divert. Usually, they try to give us a heads up. I think that would be fair to say.
And then do they let you know when they're off divert at some point?
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Johnson. Councilor Bearable.
Chief, I've got a question for you. Since you're having trouble getting divert statistics, doesn't every ambulance transfer have to be reported to the state? Can't you get that information out of the state status, even though it might be behind the times? It wouldn't be exactly, but you could build a bank of how many diverts over time that have happened out of Essentia, because they got to report those if they transfer by an ambulance. Am I not correct on that? To a state. And that's public information once it's at the state level.
That's correct, but the state reporting form, to the best of my knowledge, does not have is this a divert transport, like a box to check, so you could actually note it. It would be in the narrative section only. Chief Martinson, correct me if I'm wrong.
Are you asking like when we're not, as a divert, as in when we're not taking a transfer, or when the hospital is telling us
Well,
not to transport
when
there?
a hospital tells you it's divert, and then they have a bunch of transfers in there, we know they're coming from Deer River, you know where they're coming from. Every once in a while from another source. We know that data. That's the data I'm talking about, because that is absolutely not in the best interests of the city of Virginia and our service with the number of diverts that I'm seeing in these reports that you put out, but you don't have the accurate number.
As far as when the hospital goes on divert, sometimes it is just a phone call to us saying, don't bring us any more patients.
Okay, so you don't know if they've actually shipped some out of there when they're on divert. Is that what I'm
These,
hearing?
they, the 100%, when they're on divert and we're unable to help them take patients out of their hospital to empty beds, they are going elsewhere to get
Do we have no way of
transfers.
getting those numbers? Is that what I'm hearing? Other
Well, when
than
Deer
that,
River
there's-
comes, that's out of Itasca County, so we don't have access to that.
But the state does. They have all access to every county in the state.
They would know the location of the patients, but they may not know the underlying reason why that patient didn't go to Virginia, they went to Hibbing. There is no, other than the narrative portion, there is nothing in the charting that says this is a divert or this is because of a divert. Unless the care provider wrote that in the chart, and then there's no a data collector that would actually be able to scan those charts, because you're dealing with hundreds of charts. And unless somebody was to read line by line through that, and this is what our billing company does, they read line by line in order to look for those modifiers and those billing agencies, or those billing points, there would not be a way to say, we had 23 calls, last month that
Yeah,
were
I
diverted.
understand. So we're looking at the state legislation. We need to change those forms. So on a statewide basis, I imagine that form's the same basically statewide, depending on the type of service that you have, whether it's BLS or ALS, maybe a little difference in those forms, but that should be a box that needs to be checked on the forms, and that's an area that we could go to the state and ask them to get new forms changed, even if it don't have to be legislation, just through the reporting services. That's just a thought. But I have another thought here. And I don't know whether this is the right time to bring it up. And I had a conversation with you on the phone the other day. You have a county in the state that is gone, and that's Cass County, with a system where they are adding additional dollars to all the ambulance services in Cass County through the county, with basically a taxing district, or there's another term.
Subordinate taxing district.
Subordinate taxing district. We have not even approached St. Louis County with this, but I think it's time we support, because we don't have to have state approval for that. And we need to approach our individuals, commissioners in St. Louis County, that this needs to be done for all of St. Louis County. I don't care what service it is, but it needs to be done for every service, and that would generate more dollars, and it wouldn't be a huge amount of money to anybody. It's like basically a lien on your tax statement, or come through your tax statement. St. Louis County could do that very easily.
I'm very encouraged by that. In fact, we have a proposal that's under review right now by our attorney, correct? And so
Okay,
once
so
we get a
maybe
legal opinion back.
Maybe I'm sneaking this way early, but I think it's time to get some publicity out here, because I'm really concerned about these diverts. Because I know where your next step is going to go, looking for manpower, and it's going to be hard for myself as a counselor, when you're losing all this revenue already, to support additional dollars unless you can justify it. And I've been around a long time, so I've been through lots of this stuff. I hate to tell you that ahead of time, but I know where this is heading.
All right, well, I will let Battalion Chief Martinson present on staffing solutions unless there's something else.
Okay, just one moment. In addition to what the Counselor Bearbush said, I think that went to an earlier conversation that was brought up by Counselor Paulson about us put together a strategy moving forward and looking at all options on the table and making a presentation moving forward. So I look forward to that information coming back from our city attorney and recommendations from you and staff on a proper way and a mechanism to make a presentation at all levels, from the county level to the state level as well. Thank you. Counselor Freely had a question before we go to Counselor Martinson. Battalion Chief Martinson. Counselor Freely.
Just trying to summarize in my mind kind of where we're at from where we began this presentation. I guess ultimately what we're talking about is how we can most effectively, efficiently, and comprehensively attend to patient welfare. Okay, and then secondly, then the issue is how then we can balance the burden that the personnel is having to deal with regard to the volume of calls that you're dealing with. And then thirdly, it would be trying to capture the reimbursement from all of those that we're missing or unable to do. And so like I kind of alluded to last time, the balance will come with the need for the personnel and the cost we'll incur for that. Will that be a balance with the revenue that we're not acquiring at this point in time? So that's kind of where we're going to be looking in terms of like what we can hire, who we have to hire, and how soon this can be accomplished.
You're both thinking ahead a little bit. I want to talk about the staffing solution, but that's a very nice summarization. We have a demand, and we cannot keep up with the current demand, and we have two choices. We either rise to the occasion or we shrink from it, and there's some pretty serious consequences if we don't meet the demand, and I can talk about those in detail. But if nobody else has any questions, let's let Battalion Chief Martinson talk about the proposed staffing solution and how that would meet the needs and the demand that we're facing.
And comes with this presentation is the cost-benefit analysis moving forward.
I'll talk about that
Yes, you will.
afterwards.
Thank you very much. Battalion Chief Martinson, thank you.
Morning, Council.
Thanks for putting this together.
So a while back, Chief asked me to start looking into some scheduling changes to better utilize our single role staff. What that would be 24/7 coverage, 7 days a week, which I'm here to present. So the shift I looked at many 12-hour shifts. That's about the only way we would be able to get to 24/7 coverage versus just putting them on our regular 3 shifts that we have now. Looked at many schedules that EMS divisions throughout the United States use. I did quite a bit of research on it. This was the schedule that worked the best for agencies that both looked into fatigue and benefits to the members that they employ. This is a 24/7 coverage dedicated to transport unit staff, single role EMT paramedics. This would consist of 4 3-person teams, which equals 12. That's what would be needed to utilize this schedule appropriately. The 12-hour schedule would go from 0700 to 1900, 1900 to 0700. The 28-day cycle, slow rotation between day and shifts. It does average 42-hour work weeks in a 2-week. This is what the teams would look like. It goes days, overnights, I would believe is what the O's stand for. Oh, off duty, I'm sorry. So we'll go 2 days on. If you look at team 1, go 2 days on, 2 off, 3 on, 2 off, 2 on, 3 off. And that's actually what the schedule is called. 2 on, it's a 2-3-2 schedule. This is broken down into weeks. It gets a little bit more easy to look at. So if you look at a calendar, this would what team 1 would look like. There's their days and their nights. That's what the schedule would look like. They'd have every other weekend off, and it'd be a 3-day weekend. That 3-day weekend is important because that's where they convert from days to nights. They have a 3-day break to get ready for their midnight shifts, which is 2 weeks. Team 2 would fit in here. Team 3. What that gives us is 3 single roles for 24 hours, 7 days a week. Benefits to this, it's a 24/7 coverage, dedicated primary transfer team. This team would be dedicated, especially on the midnights, to cover those transfers that we are not taking at this time. Chief will be able to go into a lot more there. This is 12-hour shifts. 12-hour shifts prevent fatigue and high utilized resource. No employee works more than 3 consecutive days. It's a benefit, and a 3-day weekend every other weekend.
Okay. Battalion Chief Martinson, so just to clarify for the general public, I think we all understand, these are for single role paramedics only.
Single role EMT paramedics only, yes.
And so this schedule will apply only to them.
Only to them. The schedule that they're currently on now, they work a 40-hour work week. They work 2 16s and an 8, and they're varying schedules. That gives us coverage from 0700 to only 11 p.m. at night.
And so the current single role paramedics are full-time with the city, correct?
Yes.
And so this proposal is also requesting this additional staff need to be full-time as well.
For this schedule to be, to work efficiently, in everything that I've found, it would require 12 single roles. Make the 14.
But they'd be full-time employees.
That would be up to.
I'd like to clarify, ideally, we'd like 12 to start. We can't even start this right now with our current staffing of 6. So we have to have at least 2 more to start the schedule. But ideally, to make it work fully, like Joel is saying, BC Martinson saying, 12 would be the ideal amount of people we would have hired.
Yeah, and I understand that. So
If they 40 hours a week is full-time, yes.
full-time, that was my question. Thank you, Britt, for that clarification. Counselor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. Can you clarify when we're doing the transfers at night, are those emergent transfers? Are they convenience transfers? Why is the request coming that we're moving people in the middle of the night as opposed to during the day?
That's a great question, and I don't really have an accurate answer for you. Yes, if we take a transfer at 3 in the morning, most likely it's an emergent transfer, one that has to go. We also do a lot of return transfers just to help empty the hospital, whether it's back to Edgewood Vista or to the nursing homes in the area. One of my toughest jobs as a battalion chief is to make sure, is fatigue, and I got to monitor fatigue of our crew. That's where transfer turn downs in the middle of the night like that, I really have to make those judgment calls for how the day has gone and where we're at staff-wise. So there's a...
Would you also describe, when I've been there on my ride-alongs, I've seen, could you describe your point system and how you actually, there's a process for monitoring that. Could you describe that, please?
Yep, each crew does that a little bit differently too. I can speak for my crew. We have a point system. If we had 3 crews for that day, 3 ambulances that are staffed, we have a transfer points and local points. And I mean, to make it easy, if you go on a local, which would be within our jurisdiction here, you get a point there. If you go on a transfer, you get a point there. It's just a point system to monitor fatigue. Like I said, each crew does it differently, but that's the tool that I use to make sure that my staff is even able to safely drive down the road when something comes in at 3, 4 in the morning. We also have to look at our staffing levels during the day as far as keeping fire coverage within our area. And I sent an email out, I think it was December 10th. It was a day, I worked a 12-hour shift, overtime that day just to make coverage some time off. And that day, I had, I believe, 8 transfers turned down, but it was due to, we had a fire call. We had an EMS call of a hand that was impaled on a fence. That took resources. We had a rescue truck there. We had to cut a fence all apart to get this hand off. I mean, every day is a new adventure for us at the fire hall, and we have to utilize our staff in those ways as long as trying to take as many of these transfers as possible. Kind of to utilize our single role staff as the transport division. Each day is
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does that answer your question, Counselor Johnson?
Absolutely, thank you.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Battalion Chief Martinson. Back to the chief for the next couple of slides on the cost-benefit analysis, because it's going to narrow down, it's going to come down to two things. What's the cost? How many people you need? How can we start with? What's the cost? And can we use it as a budget and the capturing of the revenues as stream as well? And I see you're going to make that presentation now. Thank you, Chief.
Well, and thank you, Battalion Chief Martinson. You know, I've always believed that the best answers come from those that are closest to the problem. And I remember many years ago when my EMS chief turned to me and said, well, Alan, if you don't like the schedule, why don't you make one? And I did. And everybody agreed to it, and we had a different schedule. So I learned a valuable lesson from that, is that, you know, the people that are closest to the problem can solve it for you. You just got to listen to them. So thank you for that. Again, the bottom line comes down to you as a council knowing where the revenue is coming from. How do we pay for this ask? We're asking for 6 more single-role EMTs and paramedics. We did it once. We rose to the occasion. We did more transfers. We brought in more revenue, but we're not keeping pace with it. The amount of transfers are outpacing us. So I'll take again this last week look back. So we had 66 emergency medical calls on that top line. And you'll say, well, why doesn't 66 and 25 equal 100 call week? Well, we had some lift assists, we had some smoke alarms, you know, fire alarms, we had some other things in there that made up the remainder of those 9 calls that are deficient there. We don't bill for those. Those are, well, we can't bill for those. Those are fire calls, and that's what people, you know, pay their taxes for. So there were 66 emergency medical calls that were billed for. Per our billing company, Transmedic, we receive $725 for each of those medical calls that are 911 emergency calls. It's an overall average they've looked at over 2 years of data, and $725, and that was a handout I passed out last time, spoke briefly about it. There were 25 hospital transports. Those are an average of $1,200 apiece. That is an average. There are some that are billed at over $4,000, and there are some that are locked into a Medicare rate of a base rate of $540 and, you know, $8 a mile. Those get us, you know, $800 or less. And then there's some that just don't pay. So when you take all of those together, that's how they come up with those averages of calls. So it is $1,200. Each of those transports is worth at least $1,200 to us. Each of the 911 calls is worth $725. So I totaled up the weekly revenue at the bottom there for that 1 week. So you can see the totals there of weekly revenue from emergency medical versus hospital transports. Even though there's less hospital transports, you know, per call, they're much more valuable. And then there's also a cost or an unrecognized revenue, as I call it, for those turndowns. There was 9 times we were not able to, just due to lack of staffing, we're not able to meet the times that we were requested. That's a realized dollar or unrealized revenue there and a realized dollar loss. So what I've done is I've positioned that with that revenue that could be received, and you say, well, do we get 9 turndowns a week? Yeah, actually it's closer to 12 right now. And that's not just from Essentia, that is from other hospitals as well. That's Cook, that's Hibbing, that's sometimes Ely, sometimes Northern Pines, and Aurora. So that revenue is there, and it has been there. It didn't, you know, change during COVID. It dropped for about a month there in late March, early April, and then slowly started coming back in May. And that was just the entire system was depressed at that time. But this has existed for a long time. The cost of 6 single rolls, and these numbers, I just got some updated numbers about 11 minutes before the council session started. So Sherry and I can work with the actual numbers here, but we've estimated it would be about $8,700 a week for 6 single rolls. You see that revenue juxtaposition there against the weekly revenue loss, and there's a estimated, you know, $2,000 of cost above, or profit above cost in that slide for the revenue and margins. What was the? Okay, we'll go to the next slide, and I think this might need some slight adjusting because I think the latest figures that Sherry had was just over $500,000 for single role, for 6 single role EMTs, salary and benefits. Again, this is, if that is correct, that's almost a 20% increase from 2017 in our single role EMTs and costs. And there's some benefits that were added in the last contract session which really bumped up the cost of having single role EMTs. So it would be just up above, I think it's 506 or 506,000 if I did the math with your numbers. 500 and, what is it? So times that by 6.
Okay, repeat that. Sherry.
$85,000, $85,000 annually, times 6.
So the public can hear this.
Thank you. $85,000 annually for salary and benefits for a single role EMT.
Thank you.
So that, I did not do a single role paramedic. It would be just a few, about 50 cents more per hour. So if you wanted to round it to $90,000 to $100,000 annually, you'd be safe. Just the benefits were given to the single roles in the last go-around. So like the chief did mention, there isn't some additional cost there.
I will point out that between 2017, when we ran these numbers, it was 6 single-role EMT salaries and benefits were $417,000. Using the new numbers that Sherry's just given, that's a $510,000. So that red line there could go up as high as $510,000. That is, and just almost a $93,000 increase in a period of 3 years for six single roles. So that's a significant cost increase for those individuals, and I want to acknowledge that there's a real cost. I would also say, please balance that against the uncaptured transfer revenue, which I used last time to justify that, and it is there. Those are solid numbers. That is from our billing company that we get $1,200 per transfer. It is a fact that we are turning down a minimum of 9, upwards of an average of 12 actually transfers per week because we do not have the staff to complete those requests. So,
Well, Chief, if I may interrupt just for a moment, we're looking at an annual cost of about $600,000, say, for these new 6 single-role paramedics, right around there.
510.
So it's 510, not 600,000. Sherry?
Where's my paperwork? Thank you.
So as she's taking a look at this, I guess my question would be for you, Chief, is that, you're looking at the uncaptured transfer revenue. This is idyllic, is it not? That, you wouldn't be able to capture all those transfers because of certain issues with respect to time off, sick leave, schedule issues, that unanticipated injury issues. So I see you're saying that right here, the total annual cost is another $84,263 above this $456?
No, not above.
No, that's what it cost per EMT, single role per EMT annually.
Times that by 6.
So times that by 6.
So that's 510,000. So when you said rounded off to 90 or 100,000, I was looking at single-role paramedics at rounded off to 100,000. That's where I came up with that $600,000 number.
That's a single role EMT. There's a difference between a EMT and a paramedic. The paramedic in the contract is a little bit more.
Okay. So my question is, thank you for this. My question is, so if you're asking for 6 single-role paramedics, this single-role EMT paramedics, so you're saying that the cost is going to be about $510,000, give or take. Okay, thank you. And so you look at that $510,000, you look at the uncaptured transfer revenue, which is $561,600 based on current numbers. I know this is idyllic. So what you're saying, Chief, based upon your experience and based on what's happened in the past and based on the data you've provided to us, that you believe that hiring these 6 new additional paramedic EMTs that you're requesting for us to consider, you'll be able to, the cost-benefit ratio, you'll be able to recover the costs associated with additional revenue streams of the transfers you're not capturing. Is that correct?
Exactly. The goal is to break even. We're not a private ambulance. We don't strive to make money. We just want to break even and cover our costs.
And I only ask that because for the benefit of the public who's listening, to understand specifically what we're talking about. Thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Britt. Britt? Counselor Beyondich, you had a question for the chief?
I do. As we're talking about all the, the extra people, how are we sitting on vehicles, the ambulances, and do we have enough to keep some in town and to keep doing what we're doing and adding more? And when would we be looking at having to increase our vehicles?
So we don't have enough housing space to increase our vehicles right now, but with 5 frontline and a reserve ambulance, we definitely do have enough vehicles to run the demand. It is the personnel that we are running out of at this time. When we get the new public safety building, we will be able to house, that will probably be the time to think about having an additional ambulance just due to the demand. And if this proposal goes ahead with Mountain Iron to consolidate, that would probably be a time to have an ambulance over there as well. So it's like a giant Rubik's Cube where we're trying to fit everything into where it goes. But yes, we do have enough ambulances. We don't have enough people. Going forward, we will need to probably in the 2022, 2023 timeframe, think about maybe going to 7 ambulances, 6 being frontline and 1 reserve. We have 2 new ones coming this year. One of them is part of the CARES money, and then another one was purchased with part of our capital outlay that was budgeted and a grant from this year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Counselor Beyondich. Counselor Johnson?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, part of the reason we're having this discussion is Essentia has a concern that we are turning them down and they're maybe looking at bringing an ambulance here. Is that also one of the things that we need to be aware of as we're having this discussion?
Yes, and thank you for that question. There is a downside to not doing anything, and part of that is when the hospital like Essentia can show through their data that they have patients that are waiting for 3 hours. What they don't do is quantify the need of those patients. So if a patient's waiting 3 hours and has a serious medical condition, then I think we can all agree that that's a problem and we need to get on that. When a patient's waiting 3 hours because they want them to return back to the nursing home, not such a big issue, except when that patient is taking up a bed that then doesn't allow us to bring in a new patient that has an emergency medical. So again, nobody is an island here. Everything is interconnected. So we say, okay, 3 o'clock in the morning, grandma needs to go back to Edgewood Vista from Essentia, Virginia, and well, can that wait till 7 o'clock in the morning? Seems like reasonable. Let her sleep the rest of the night. She can go home in the morning, except when that ER is full already, and now we go on divert because, somebody that is not admitted to the hospital is still in an ER bed, is taking up a space. So that starts a chain reaction, and you repeat that a couple of times with other beds and other things. Maybe it's a psychiatric patient that needs to go to Thief River Falls. Well, if you've had a crew that's been up for 24 hours or 22 hours at that point, has fought a structure fire that day, is absolutely exhausted. I mean, how many of us stay up 22 hours straight, and then you want to put them on the road for 10 hours to go to Thief River Falls? That's not a good idea by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, we've had neighboring services that have done that, and they've run ambulances in the ditch too, doing it, because people have fallen asleep, or we don't want that. We want to take care of our patients and our people. But Essentia does have a concern in that when those patients that they need out of their facility are not transported, what are they to do? It's again, we talk about that backup. They want to admit a new patient, but they can't because somebody's in a bed. So I understand their position and I understand their frustration, but we only have so much resources to work with. When we have a staffing of 6 people, and I've already got 2 medicals out. One's on an intercept in Cook, and another one's out in Eveleth on an intercept. 6-person staffing with a single role. Now all of a sudden I've dropped down to 3 people, and I'm calling in overtime staff. And if people come in, like Hardy here, I'll use him as an example, working for 42 hours straight. That's not, we don't want to do that on a regular basis. You will burn people out, you will have accidents, you will have injuries. And so while I understand Essentia's issue, they have a legitimate concern about wanting these patients transported. When they can't find us meeting that need, they're going to look for other options. And, you know, last month there was 101 transfers out of Essentia, Virginia. 101. We were able to do 50 of them. You know what they did for 22 of the others? They brought in Deer River. Now, that's not exactly an expeditious, service delivery when you're calling somebody in from an hour and a half away. So to me, that says that we're following a revenue line rather than a patient care line. But maybe that was the only ambulance they could find. So there is definitely a concern that if we do not do something, and I know I've had this conversation with you, Councilor Baraboo, but we are under the governor's emergency order where he suspended all of the rules and regulations. The EMSRB really doesn't have any leeway on this. Another provider, an entity could come in, and there wouldn't be a thing we could do about it other than protest loudly. And they would just shrug their shoulders and say, yeah, the rules are out the window, everything's suspended until the governor's emergency orders are off. They could bring an ambulance in, they could run calls. It wouldn't be wise, and I know the local and I and the city council would protest very vehemently if that were to happen, because we have made some adjustments. We have moved people to longer shift schedules to cover these times. We've done whatever we can with our people, but they're tired, and we can't ask any more of them right now with the people that we have. I mean, they're maxed out. So I hope that answered your question, Councilor Johnson.
That does answer Councilor Johnson's question. Before we go to Councilor Baraboo, I think one of the concerns, when you talk about the staffing levels, you talk about Essentia, you talk about the thing, Essentia has to take on some responsibility here, and I think Sam Stone realizes that. If you don't have enough staffing at your hospital, you can't take more patients. So by minimizing their staffing levels there, by taking their business model, whatever that is, whatever they've decided to do, or modify their business model to accommodate patients and their staffing in Essentia Health Virginia, that puts a burden on us. So it's not our issue so much as we are the residual effect of trying to take care of patients that Essentia can't take care of. So I think we have to make that clear as well. So Councilor Baraboo.
Just a quick question, Chief. By my calculations, the uncaptured transfer revenue that we aren't seeing, it's not that $561, it's $748,000. If you take the 12 per week that you're saying is becoming an average now, take that times 1,200 lost in revenue, that becomes $748,000. So
you're giving me a cushion there. That's the cushion I like to build in, because when you're talking about not capturing all of the transfers, so I don't oversell things.
You're dumbing it down is basically what you're telling me.
I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. I want to.
No, I understand that, but there's a potential that could be there, and I think personally we need to take a really strong look at what your proposal will be, and you haven't finalized telling us what your proposal is, and I'd like to hear that before I make a decision on this.
Okay, and yeah, nothing in this revenue balancing negates the fact that we need to pursue funding from the county and possibly from the state and from the other jurisdictions that we're supporting. I mean, when we spend 61% of our time in Virginia and 39% elsewhere and don't get a penny for that readiness, and only get what we can bill, in patient billing, there's an issue. So, thank you.
Okay. And not to belabor this any longer, but you've seen it, and I've alluded to this before. In 2002, 18 years ago, rural ambulance service is at risk. 18 years later, we're still in the same boat we are now. And who's providing the majority of that rural ambulance ALS service? Virginia. Councilor Freilieb.
You look a little alike, I think.
Yeah. I can recognize you in your mask.
Same color.
Councilor Freilieb.
Well, I just want to thank you for the visual data that you presented today. That's I appreciate that. And it seems to me, barring any anomaly to ongoing data that we're going to acquire, that this is an affordable potential for us to be able to add that kind of staff to attend to and address those patients that really are put in jeopardy anytime you turn down a transfer, or you turn down a turn down is a jeopardized patient care. So ultimately, that's what we want to do, is to maintain our patient care. And I don't disagree with the mayor that there is some responsibility on the part of Essentia, but that's not something we can have any control over. We do have control over what we can offer to the community at large, so to speak. So the only thing that and we are in the green or the black, however you want to look at the colors, but based on the projections that we have right here, and the anomaly that I would be concerned about would be the current COVID status. How many of these patients affecting the data are COVID that may, once the inoculation occurs, will drop dramatically potentially and impact these data numbers? Is that reasonable to ask?
That is very reasonable to ask, and that's why I did a look back over 7 different years to do an average of calls. And believe it or not, the amount of transfers scheduled to come out of Essentia, Virginia is actually down from last year. It has dropped by almost 100, actually, from the records that I have. And again, they provide us a list every month of the transfers that come out of that hospital, and that's why there was 101 in November. So I do thank them for that timely provision of information, because that helps us make informed decisions. But it's just, it's very, very difficult when you look back on that and say, well, we can only do 50 of those. So COVID has affected us more than it has affected the overall hospital system. They're doing what they call load leveling, where they start shuttling patients into outside facilities in order to make room in their facility. But no, it has been a very stable number in all of the hospitals, not just Essentia, as far as transfers.
And if I could add, Mayor, just
Yes, Councilor Freely.
in terms of like the acquisition of the personnel needed, I mean, do we have a pool that's going to be available? I mean, you're aware of the training programs that are out there, and there are people that could come in and step in and do these jobs.
Just graduated a class.
Okay, all right, that's what I need to know, like if we're,
We did have a list of people that are already interviewed that were ready. We always take the top couple, but we have some very potential right below that we can always tap to.
what's the timeline then we're thinking in terms of getting this accomplished if in fact we vote in favor of this?
About 8 weeks to get somebody from interview to in the door.
Just after the first of the year. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Freely. So quick question for me, just to move this along. We've had the presentation. I think you've justified that before. I know I'll just give you 1 minute here, Chief. I do, I agree with Councilor Freely. We do have a responsibility to take the patients first. Our community suffers. The health of a patient is first and foremost under any circumstance. But really, regardless of whether transfers are up or the transfers are down, the way a hospital staffs their personnel affects the way we do our work. And so my one question to you is that, okay, if we add the additional 6 personnel, what would be our total staffing levels full-time, which they all are, for the fire department EMS? By adding these 6 additional people, how many people will we have employed?
That would be, so if we count everybody at the fire hall or just everybody, so that would be
All
6
fire-
additional from 38, so it would be 44.
We'll have 44 full-time fire EMS ALS service personnel working in the city of Virginia.
That includes our administrative assistant.
Of course, that includes everything, so thank you. So my second issue is the recommendation of staffing. And so before we go to that, did you have something else you wanted to add, Chief?
But there's one more slide about the utilization. I did this in the last presentation. So if we utilize these new single roles 15% of the time, that was our average of break even. Last time it was 13%, so it increased 2%. So
Okay, thank you.
One more, I think, is a question slide. And
Yeah.
all right, there we are.
So,
Great picture.
So for me, it's about cost-benefit analysis. You've provided that. It's about cost-benefit ratios. You've provided that. It talks about, can we afford to hire 6 more additional personnel now or incrementally over time in order to accomplish the goals and objectives that we have with respect to the transfers. It's not the transfer so much for me. I mean, it is an issue. It is the issue that draws a revenue stream. But the first and foremost concern I have is that look at what our staffing levels are now for, and what we do as an organization, as Fire EMS, and how much time they spend on the road, and I'm concerned about the fatigue factor. It's significant. And this is not something that's unusual in other full-time fire EMS personnel departments across the United States. We just happen to be one of the very few in the northern part of Minnesota that's providing the majority of the work. And so I think it's important for us to make sure we make a huge investment in our personnel, where we have hire professional, well-trained individuals. We ensure, in fact, the personnel that we have trained here, we train them so well, and they're so well respected that they, other departments in the metro area are just, chomping at the bit to have our personnel work for them. So that says a lot. So I'm supportive of hiring additional personnel. The question for me is, how many do we do it at this time? So I'm going to turn this over to our City Administrator, Britt. Britt?
What I actually wanted to say was that the important thing to take away from here is that it's not because our staff is not doing their job. Our staff is doing a very good job of taking every call that they can safely and responsibly. What we need to do here, with the big ask that we're asking for, is we need to implement a 24-hour single role schedule. And to make that happen, we have to have more single role staff. That will help alleviate some of our staff that has been coming in, and we're not kidding. When Joel say he worked a 42-hour shift, he worked a 42-hour shift. We can't have our staff doing that all the time. I thank Joel for doing that, I really, really do. But that's not common, that's not expected, and we really appreciate that he did. So we need to, you hit it right on the head, this staff is fatigued, they're tired. These transfers are not going down, they haven't gone down, they've only increased since we added single roles on originally. So that is the really important ask here, is that allowing us to get these people on board will allow us to create that 24-hour schedule, will allow us to hopefully meet more of Essentia's needs, and also help balance our budget with the cost-benefit analysis.
Okay, so my last question to you, Britt, and to you, Chief, is that we currently have how many single role?
There's 6.
There are 6 now? Yes. Okay, so if we're going to go to a 12-hour schedule, the ones that they currently work, there's going to have to be a schedule change in an MOU in the contract.
There will have to be an MOU
to
for those
move everybody
42-hour
over.
weeks. Yes. and
Okay,
to
so
change that
that'll be a
schedule.
conversation that has to be taken place. I'm sure it already has taken place
I believe
at
we started
staff
that.
levels, or, at department level, whatever the case may be. So I guess I'm asking for a recommendation from you. Before we do that, let's move, Councilor Freely has that on. Councilor Freely.
Quick computational, this is 42 hours per. So like, that's one of the concerns I have, is that we're not just talking 40 hours, it's 42 hours per person per week. So that's
Average.
overtime.
No.
No?
We would enter into an MOU with F. There's things we can do to enter into agreement for that.
Okay, so it's not going to impact additional costs for overtime.
No, we do not anticipate that. There will probably be overtime shifts available for vacations and sick leave and such, but yes,
As there is now.
as there is now.
Okay.
But we plan to address it in the MOU. That's the way, similar that we do with the police department, who has a 12-hour shift. Like Joel mentioned earlier, BC Martinson, that this is not uncommon in the EMS world. This is a schedule he found someplace else that already utilizes it. It's been done.
The numbers that we were given, though, takes that into effect. So the red and the green was regarding that, not excluding the potential overtime.
Okay, then we'll go to Councilor Johnson first, and then we'll go to the other 2 councilors that are on Zoom before we move forward. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you. And just so you know, Chief, I was able to, for Publix, show your slides while you were talking. So that was out, that will be available on YouTube for folks to see. So has there been discussion with the existing staff and the existing single roles that I'm concerned about losing staff, so somebody who's like, no, I didn't sign up for this. Can you talk about that a little bit?
There has.
Could you use the mic?
Yep.
Oh, thank you.
There has been some discussions with that. Everything's just kind of been up in the air about that. With any changes in schedules and stuff, there's stress that happens with that. But there are benefits to them moving to this schedule also.
I want to make sure we're hearing their voices too, so I appreciate that.
100%.
You have been having that discussion, and I think I seem to remembering when we hired the first 6 single roles, having the discussion that if this goes well, we're going to need more, and I don't know if well is the right word, but it is going and it is in that direction. So I'm not surprised by this because of everything that's going on. So I'm supportive of this, and I think we are really heading in the right direction. Because we're also going to be looking 2 or 3 years ahead at the shared fire services and what that means. And there's going to have to be some very creative staffing there, not only at the main fire hall, but potentially satellite garages or something at some point. So I think this is a good first step into long-range planning, and I appreciate all the work both of you and the rest of the staff have put into this.
Thank you, Councilor Johnson. Councilor Paulson, do you have any questions or comments regarding this issue before we move for a recommendation by staff?
No, I don't. But I appreciate all of the input and the information that Chief Lewis has brought forward. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Paulson.
Thank you, Mayor. I do appreciate both Chief Lewis and Battalion Chief Martinson giving such a wonderful, detailed presentation. So I guess just to kind of recap and looking even forward in the future, I do have a couple questions. What we're being asked to, what the proposal is to hire 6 full-time, increase the fire budget of approximately $500,000 a year. And my question then would be, when the shared fire services or that consolidation, you know, I know you're all working toward that progress, and I do appreciate that, along with the new public safety center. I'm just looking ahead in terms of future, because once that consolidation takes place, then the consolidated fire entity will actually have its own budget and will be separate from the city. So I'm wondering if there's maybe a forecasted time frame, you know, 5 years, 6 years, 8 years. So in terms of us planning ahead for that $500,000 increase in the fire budget.
Chief?
So that is where the subordinate taxing district plays a very, very large role. There needs to be more support from the county. $16 an EMS call and 22 cents a mile just simply isn't cutting it. That was a 1982 formula revised in 1984. And when you've got a county that's got over a $289 million budget and we are literally getting peanuts, it's time to revisit that. And so I think a subordinate taxing district's the way to do that. You know, I can't go to all 33 different jurisdictions and, you know, rattle a tin cup and say, please contribute, because they'll tell me, no, we'd rather have it for free. So there needs to be a different mechanism. What we've done in the past hasn't worked. But going forward, we do need an infusion of revenue from the county level and possibly from the state level to maintain a readiness to respond. It's not just a cost of response, it's a cost of readiness. So yes, this will work in the short time, but you're absolutely correct. Long term, we need to look at funding solutions that are based on taxing districts and stable, sustainable income rather than just billing for what we can. Because we never know when Medicare and Medicaid rates may change or when insurance provider rates may change based on those too. So that's why I want to pursue a stable funding mechanism.
Right, and I'm in favor of doing this because we need to absolutely do it. I guess my question though is, once that, from my understanding from the meeting that we all attended, once the shared fire services, the consolidation takes place, that creates its own entity with its own budget, similar to the public utilities. Is that correct?
That is correct, but that entity, as of yet, is not designed to have any kind of taxing authority. So the revenue would need to be collected from the legal entities of the City of Mountain Iron and the City of Virginia, and then any other entities that would join that organization until we can get, you know, a full district approved, and that's going to take legislative action to do that.
Right. But so for now, what we're doing now is the request is to increase the fire budget to hire the staff necessary to the tune of approximately $500,000 a year. And then the city's responsibility would be that increase up until there's a fire tax district and or the consolidation takes place, creates that new entity, and then that financial the staffing, all of it is transferred into that entity under that budget.
Correct. You would
Is
lose,
that correct?
you would lose both the cost and and then the revenue would come to that entity to offset the cost of that labor. So it would really be a transfer. It wouldn't be a, one or the other. It would be, you would just transfer that to the new entity.
Got it. Okay, thank you so much for that.
Thank you, Councilor Paulson. So Councilor Baraboo.
Yeah, Chief and rest of our counselors that are here in the room and those on the phone, I'm 100% supportive of increasing this to get closer to balancing out the workload that these men have with our department. We have a short-term solution to this until some of these other things get done. And I know Sherry's going to kick me in the tail for this, but we're going to get that $5.4 million back. And I don't think the state can take it away from what I've been looking at, because it was in legislative stuff and they would open themselves up for a lawsuit if they don't provide it because they've already passed the legislation. You can't backtrack, I don't believe anymore on that. We can temporarily take some dollars out. If Brian wants to give me an opinion on this, I don't believe they can backtrack once they've passed it in another legislative session. I think I'm correct on that. Brian, am I correct on that? Okay. So temporarily, we could, until some revenue starts coming in, I would suggest we go out immediately to put stuff together for hiring, doing those type things. I don't know what Britt needs or Sherry needs, but I think we should do this sooner than later. And we can justify, because it's going to take a number of months to get this done. It's not going to be overnight. And we can do a temporary feed out of the revenue that'll be coming back to us in July or August. I don't remember when it's coming. That's my point on this. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, thank you for the presentation. I'm looking for, we've had some discussion at the council level. The ask is for for 6 single-role EMT paramedics, and with this schedule that's been presented by Battalion Chief Martinson. So my ask is to our staff. My question is, the ask is from the fire EMS. I'm looking for I know that Britt and Sherry have looked at this along with the fire chief and his staff to determine, what best method or what best model moving forward is to try to accommodate the requests and alleviate the issues that have been presented today and offset the cost of revenue as opposed to expenditure. So Britt, I'm asking you for your recommendation of how we proceed moving forward, what your recommendation is, and what is your ask from the council today.
I think Chief Lewis alluded to that. I mean, the 12 single roles total would be the ideal schedule that they'd like to implement. We currently have 6, so I would recommend, like the previous resolution we had, we hire up to 6, giving us the latitude to stop where we need to or figure out what we need to do. Okay, so I think that's wise moving forward, that you may not need 6, you may need 6. The ask is for 6 based upon the projections. So thank you, Britt, for that. So I'm looking for some council action, comments, and questions. Councilor Johnson.
Thank you, Mayor. I would move to hire up to 6 for a total of up to 12 single roles to accomplish the new staffing levels as deemed appropriate by the administrative staff.
Okay, thank you. That's moved by Councilor Johnson. Is there support?
Mayor, I'm going to support that, making sure you single role EMTs is in that motion, because that is part of, pardon?
They can be either EMT or paramedic.
You need
one or the other.
You need to balance your EMTs and your paramedics because we can't send 2 EMTs on a call. We have to have a paramedic with an EMT. So in that balancing act, ideally it would be a 3 and 3, but we may not get 3. We may get a 4 and 2 or that, but that gives us the flexibility to work with that. Again, the difference is just a dollar and some cents an hour.
Oh, okay.
Talking a lot of money.
Yeah, so is that part of that? We need that as part of the motion then too?
I think the motion on the floor is Please repeat the motion, Counselor Johnson.
I specified just single roll. I didn't put the caveat.
okay, so it
it's just
covers both. It
as
covers both.
deemed appropriate by the
So it
staff.
covers both scenarios then. Okay, and I'm corrected. I thank you for that. I'll support the motion.
Moved by Counselor Johnson, supported by Counselor Bearable. Is there any further discussion? Counselor Barnzelli? Okay, it's supported by, okay, thank you. So, it's been moved and supported. Pam, did you get the motion?
Yes, just for clarification, can you repeat that, please?
Okay, Counselor Johnson, can you repeat that motion one more time?
Sure. I would move that we authorize staff to hire up to 6 additional single roles for up to 12 total single roles as deemed appropriate by the staff.
And Pam, this is Charlie. I supported that.
Okay, moved by Counselor Johnson, supported by Counselor Bearable. Did you get that, Pam?
Yes, I did. Thank you.
Thank you. Moved and supported. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
Battalion Chief Martinson, thank you very much. Britt, thank you. Sherry, thank you for the clarification on this. Appreciate it.
I do have one item that I need to bring up under other items of concern, if that's
Okay,
okay, while we
please.
still have Brian here.
Please do, and then we're going to take a break before we go to closed session.
That'd be wonderful, thank you. We need authorization to transfer funds from our investment, from our first bond for the MEC project to the city's checking account. We would need a motion from the council to authorize a drawdown of $5 million from the city's investments for the MEC to the city's checking account.
Okay,
Back it up a little bit. That $21 million bond we took, we invested it, if you recall. We
Correct.
did not put it in our checking account.
Correct.
We invested the entire thing.
yes,
Now, as the pay estimates are coming in,
yes.
we need to pay them, and we need to put it in our checking account.
But thank you for the clarification for the general public. Okay, so.
Because it was a long time ago. but
It was?
We wisely knew we didn't need the money at that single moment, so we put it in and got very, very small interest, but some interest. It was-
Well, we put in investment account for
Some is
this
better than
purpose.
none, yes.
So you're asking for a drawdown of a transfer from our investment account of $5 million to our checking account for the MEC project.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct, please.
Looking
I
for a
will make
motion.
that motion.
Okay, Counselor Beyondich makes that motion to do the money transfer. Is there support?
support.
Support by Counselor Paulson. Is there any further discussion?
Just one clarification too, that
Yes,
Sherry and I
please.
spoke this morning. We plan, this will probably be a quarterly request that we'll come back with as the drawdowns keep happening.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Okay, it's been moved and supported. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye, opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. And we have one more item, which is on our personnel. 2 is discuss city labor negotiation strategies related to labor negotiations with ASPE. You're recommending we go into closed session for this? Before we do that, let's recess the city council for a moment and let's have a little break. Thank you very much. Okay, we had just recessed the committee of the whole meeting for a moment to take a quick break. We have one item that's listed on the agenda at this point in time. And before we get started, I want to make sure that Counselor Paulson and Counselor Beyondich are on the line. Counselor Paulson?
I'm here, thank you.
Thank you. Counselor Beyondich?
I'm here as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Do we have anybody else on the line, Britt? Yep, but, okay. But will there be anybody else? Thank you very much. So looking for a motion to recess the council meeting, recess the committee of the whole meeting and go into closed session, discuss item 2 on the personnel agenda, which is discuss the city's labor negotiating strategy related to labor negotiations with ASPE Local Number 454.
I'll make a motion to close session.
Motion by Councilor Friedrich to close. Is there support? Support by Councilor Barnzelli. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Aye, opposed, motion carries. We are now in closed session.